Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Word with Webb podcast. I'm Eric, and I'm here with the Reverend Dr. Richard Webb.
Hi there.
In this show, we get a chance to nerd out on a variety of biblical topics with Pastor Richard.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Before we do that, I want to thank you for tuning into this episode and would like to ask you a quick favor. Our mission here at Hope is to reach out to the world around us and share the everlasting love of Jesus Christ. So if you could take a second to rate and review the show and maybe send it to a friend, that's one thing you can do to help reach more people. Also, if you ever have any questions for Richard or topics you'd like to hear discussed on the show, you can submit those by clicking the link in the description. That's linktree.com/wordwithweb. In this podcast, we're interviewing the Reverend Dr. Brian Brown, campus pastor of Hope-Elim, a campus of Lutheran Church of Hope, which is across from Drake University. Dr. Brown is also known for his accomplishments in athletics and leadership development at the university level. As happens from time to time, our recording equipment had some troubles during the first half of our conversation with Pastor Brian, and we lost that part of our conversation. But the rest of the conversation is fully worth a listen, so that's why we thought we would still provide that for you here today. We enter our conversation talking with Pastor Brian and Richard about how joy often emerges as we do hard things, and even in the sacrifices that we make. I begin this conversation with that observation. Well, the way I hear you talking about that is we just talked about it being an opportunity.
Mm.
And there's so much joy in the way you're talking about the things that the opportunities or the sacrifice that you've given to God. Sure. How do you understand kind of both the opportunity and sacrifice of our gifts in order to honor God in what we do? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Sure, absolutely.
I think of two things just from, I'll start with a survey that was done about 15 years ago, where they were looking at trying to quantify various levels of Christian growth. Mm-hmm. So level 5, one of the characteristics was incredible sacrifice on the part of the person following Jesus. And then when they interviewed those people and they talked about the sacrifice, the response by those people is, what sacrifice? Mm-hmm. I don't feel like I'm sacrificing a thing. Which then leads me to Romans 12, where it says that we're living sacrifices. There's all kinds of ways you can approach it. I want to just approach it in one way, is by living sacrifice it's a sacrifice that produces life. Mm. And so if you go back to the Old Testament, when you do a thank you sacrifice, there's nothing more cool than, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good word for human relationships, when you get to build somebody up, or when you express gratitude for a friendship. I mean, you get to see it on their face, but there's something about the act of expressing gratitude, regardless of how they respond, that fills you up. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm just thinking from the biblical standpoint is sacrifice gives life, it doesn't take life.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. And when you asked the question, Eric, I was really immediately thinking about Romans 12 as well. And that just came to mind in terms of a living sacrifice is almost it's like it's oxymoron. Yeah. Where it's how you're gonna be living and sacrificial at the same time, but it's the honor of being able to look at Luke 9, right? In 23 it says that it's our opportunity as a follower to forget our own way, sacrifice what we want, sacrifice the way we know it, and then pick up our cross daily and follow after the Lord. And so there is a opportunity to come to be living in this new way, right? Opportunistic, but it's sacrificial in nature because you got to give up what you've known and take a leap of faith. So in growing up in South Louisiana, seeing what I've seen, experience what I've experienced, and then to have an encounter it's like to be able to choose, okay, God, I don't have all the answers. There's more uncertainty than familiar, but I'm following you. And when I come to see, wow, then it's like it's not work. Yeah. It's a lifestyle. And it's a willingness to say, if you did it for me, you can do it for someone else. And it's like always hope. There's always opportunity in that space. And so as a coach, I saw that. And it was some great athletic performances, but there were some young people who grew stronger in who they were as people. And to this day, as an administrator, there were coaches I got a chance to pour into. When I got a little bit more distant from the athletes, there were coaches that we were able to build these relationships. And so now as a pastor, it's all of those relational dynamics that have been equipping for where I am now and what I get to do.
Yeah. Have you ever found yourself in a place or specifically a job that does not feel life-giving, that you know is, you don't have to say what it is, what it was or whatever, but it was difficult to find like how it is to find that joy out of the sacrifice because of you just feel like you weren't in the right spot, and kind of like, what would you say to someone who's, you know, maybe in a job that they don't like and they don't feel called to, and it is feeling like a burden to do, and to how do they get out of that and try to find where they are called to?
Yeah, this is going to sound a little bit contrived, but I remember when I first got out of college, my first job, and I graduated with an undergraduate degree in industrial technology, emphasis on industrial safety. OSHA was a big part of the deal, and ergonomics was a big part of what's going on. So in Natchitoches, Louisiana, when I graduated from Northwestern State University, my first job out of college was at a chicken plant that was called ConAgra. It's like Tyson chicken. And it was ergonomics was a big deal. And so I worked with anybody who was hurt in the safety area. So these were all people who was hurt, and because of repetitive movement, they didn't want to be there. And I was this young guy coming in there with this new ergonomic thing, and I had to manage these people. And it wasn't a lot of fun. It was a night shift.
Yeah.
But you get to know people. And you get to see them and have compassion on them, the same compassion that Jesus talked about a lot. So it seems contrived, but even then, I knew that there was a reason for me being there and getting to know their hurts and their pains and it was messy. It was all of this, and by the end, those people were so had every reason to be angry, upset at the company, and they began to at least be cared for. And I saw how that made them feel. And so even then, I saw myself back in Louisiana in my old neighborhood, and the people who just needed to be cared for. I saw that in those folks. So regardless, I'd say to the person who's working a job, I think God calls us to be a good steward where we are before the next thing. Care for people, see their needs, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Do well, while you're there, because the next thing is coming, so that you can recognize what's next, where is God calling next, and maybe there's there for a reason. And so I can talk a while about this, just because no matter where you are, there's a reason. Sometimes we think, man, this sucks, but it's probably something we prayed for, an opportunity, a job. And I think sometimes we complain about the thing we prayed for.
Yeah, yeah. What I hear you saying a lot is, it's not often about the task you're doing, but the people that you're doing it with. And, sometimes the task can be the thing that gets us down, and you're talking a lot about getting to know the people, make a relationship with the people, understanding the people. Like,
I think so.
And it was the job that got you in front of those people. And so I think that's a good perspective shift that we can definitely take from it.
Yeah. It feels good not to be making it up. It is true exactly how I feel, because no matter where it is, I think that we're still called to, in that moment, to be, especially if we're growing in our faith, still called to be salt and light, which is what we're called to.
Yeah. And so you've had a couple jobs that you've had throughout your career. So there's those times where, we're called to steward in that moment, but also there are times when other opportunities come up, and you do switch roles, switch jobs. How did you understand, like, the time to leave that job with ConAgra, was it?
Yeah.
To go to the next thing, and not just maybe going because we maybe don't like it, but because it's a new opportunity and a new calling that you feel like you've been given.
It's a great question, and Pastor, do you want to jump in? I feel like I'm dominating a lot of the conversation.
Well, that's actually the point. No, here's what I'm hearing. There's sort of two strands in our journey with God. One is how He wires us up, so jumping. And I would say, especially to restless people, is to do an inventory of what you think your assets are. Yeah. And if you're not feeling good about yourself, you need to go to someone who's a good friend, and they will tell you how God wired you. and then you need to meditate on the fact that God did, in fact. 'Cause, we are a custom job. We did not come off an assembly line. So that's the first thing I'm hearing is just, you're not bragging if you just recognize what God has done.
Yeah.
The second is everything drives towards loving God and loving the neighbor. And so if you're working at ConAgra and you got a degree in ergonomics, then that is your setting or your context for how you love your neighbor. So you are using what God has given you in terms of your degree and your skill set. And that's coming together with a context of where Jesus wants to show up through you. And so there's that sacredness we've seen again. And again, you clearly weren't there forever. But what is striking me is you recognize the moment.
Sure.
That it was a holy moment and it wasn't just a waste of time.
Yeah, some of it is in reflection. If I'm honest, I didn't like getting up, staying up all night.
Yeah.
And the chickens running around. And I'm thinking, man, what have I got myself into? So I knew that there was going to come an end to that season, but the season was an important one while I was in it. And I think that that I also saw what could be and that God has something else.
Yeah.
And so with that, there was a transition, several transitions in jobs. And while I was in Columbia, and we did this course, and I did it 3 times. And I did it once, and then I started to actually facilitate it. And it was just very simple, experiencing God with Henry Blackaby. And it just talked about how do we experience God.
Yeah,
And so that process of just knowing that God is always at work, seeing how he invites us into what he's doing, going through the process of making some decisions about how we hear from God, and then be able to know that it comes to a crisis belief, and then how do we then adjust our lives. That little process to this day helps me to when I'm feeling like I'm experiencing God, what's next. And then part of that is what I've used to determine next steps. One, God speaks through circumstances. So some of the circumstances was that, opportunities opened up in Europe to go compete. And so I was able to transition from there. And both Natasha and I, God speaks through his word, which I was growing and hungry. I remember going to this Friendship Baptist, was this little church. But every time I'd walk inside, I was so emotionally overwhelmed. I would weep and just looking out the little window as we sang just hymns, just pass me not, O gentle Savior, all the little, and I would just weep because my heart was so open. So even in that space, God was speaking. And so as I continued to say, God, what's next? He spoke through other people, and, there was other things that became confirmed. So when I got resolve, when there was a prayer and resolve, and I knew it was of God, God gave me courage to make the next step. And it's the same thing that I used actually when I was the athletic administrator at Mizzou to come here. It was the same process.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going next. I was going to ask you how does, because you talked about you felt a genuine calling years ago to ministry, and that became the bivocational ministry. And so, talk about that. And Richard, you as well. You've had other careers as well. So like the calling to both. How do we discern between a genuine calling and I'm just interested in this?
Yeah.
And is there any overlap to that? And I'll hold off on the specifically pastoral calling for now, but just in general, as you're moving, I think people struggle to hear. Maybe they struggle to hear God tell them, "Hey, this is where you should go." Is it partially that we don't know how to listen, or God's given us the freedom to choose that, or I'll leave it at that for now, so I don't throw too many questions at once, because I tend to do that.
Yeah. I would say in my personal experience, there's been a diversity of ways that God has spoken to me, depending. My first, I'd say probably early on, it was a feeling, which I think initially I was completely clueless and just went and wanted to find my dream job. I mean, which is really funny because I should have known better, given that I was, being nurtured by people, but I was thinking in a very secular way, where I was kind of behaving like a practicing atheist. I mean, it didn't occur to me that God might have something to say about where I should be working. Just, I'm an organist. I love music. Go find a place. Now, God will work with whatever He's handed. So it's not like, He's not like, yeah, you think you can shut me out. No, I'm still going to guide you, silly boy. But there have been times where the decision was where you add things up, you look at it, kind of fairly rational decision. And those can be God-guided. I mean, optimally that's being soaked with prayer. I'll tell you, there were two very major moves where God just said, yep, that's what you're doing. The first one was when I was in Seattle at my dream job. This wonderful church with this pipe organ that I had a hand in building.
Yeah.
And I had built this huge program with a gigantic budget. And all of a sudden I get a call from Chicago from people that I didn't really, I was like, whatever. That was our denominational headquarters. And they said, how'd you like to come and be, focus on worship and evangelism? And my first thought is no. And as he was talking, God said, you're going there, right? And I'm like, I could just feel my gut. And that was kind of like bittersweet because I'm like, and leave this? And God said, yep. And I knew by the end of that phone call that obedience meant to, submit my job application and go through interview process, and I wound up there. The second one was funny because God sort of hijacked me. So we were doing a conference here at Hope, and Pastor Mike calls up and says, how'd you like to come here? And I needed to do a site visit, and that's what I thought he was talking about. And I said, yeah, we need to do a site visit just to kind of think of where we're going to have the events, the breakouts, and all that. And he says, no. How would you like to come here? Well, I had no interest whatsoever. So I told him, sure, I'll pray about it, which, by the way, is a nice Christian lie that says no. Never in your life am I ever going to do that. And there's a little tone of voice you use when you say, I prayed about it, that lets the person know,
Yeah.
Well, then my conscience got to me about 3 days later, and I thought I better just do the drill. So I started praying, and God said, you're going there. I mean, and that was weird, because in both cases, I didn't want to leave. So, but not every decision has been that way. And I have to tell you, my pattern is about 18 months into anything I do, I think, I've made a horrible mistake, So it doesn't exclude buyer's remorse. It's still a real complicated thing. This is not, oh, yes, you got a word of the Lord. Okay, now it's smooth sailing. But, and I would say this doesn't matter whether you're, on a church staff or you're, working in the marketplace, or if, however you're serving the Lord. Sometimes it's out of rational decision-making. Other times it's a gut hunch. Other times God just gets in your head and sometimes in your face as well. And then again, even with all that, sometimes you have to work out the complexities of what happens afterwards,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like people are afraid to make the wrong decision. Like they heard God. Richard, you always like to say, is it the pizza last night, right?
Yeah, last night's pizza. Yeah.
What would you say to someone like who's trying to discern or find God's call on their life, and they really just don't want to make the wrong decision? Sure. It's a faithful feeling. Like I want to be obedient. I want to follow God, but I don't want to hear wrong. If I hear wrong, it might gonna mess things up.
Yeah. I think that with prayer and with listening and trying to make a decision, you won't always have it perfectly. But if we put our confidence and trust in God, that God, I'm seeking your face. I'm asking you to give me that direction. You don't have it, but you find, again, I'll go back to the peace and resolve to where I feel like I'm hearing from God through His word, through circumstances. God is at work where I sense God. And you make the decision fully leaning on God, even if it's wrong. God is going to be with you.
Yeah.
God is going to guide you. He's, and even if it's right, there'll be some hardship in it and it'll feel wrong. So I think leaning and trusting and having resolve to say, God, I'm following you.
Yeah.
And wherever you go in that space, God is not surprised by the decision we make. That God will still, I think, provide guidance, direction, his presence. And if it's to turn around, God will help us turn around. If it's the right path, God help us to stay on path. Because sometimes, no matter what the decision is, you said, Pastor Webb, it's going to feel at some point it was wrong. It's something about it's going to be like, it's a challenge because life is challenging.
Yeah.
So in that challenge, you will wonder, did we make the right decision? And a lot of times it's the right decision if we trusted and follow God the best that we can. It's the right decision.
Yeah.
So take that leap of faith. If it's chaotic and it's a mess and you don't know, be still. And know I'm God. Just wait on God until you find that there's a place of resolve. When I was the director of the Drake Relays for 10 years, had Hy-Vee as a sponsor. Things was going great. A lot of influence in the city, doing this and that. And then the call came from Mizzou. There was a racial unrest on their campus. There was opportunity to come back and be a part of something that was bigger than I was doing. I wasn't looking to leave. My daughter had already made a decision the year previous to go to Mizzou, so I saw that alignment. And when I walked into St. Hatfield Club and said that office and said that I was leaving, I had resolve. It wasn't, I think. I had prayed about it. God had already spoken to me. Natasha and I was already on the same page with resolve, and we departed. Same thing. I'm at Mizzou, have gotten to a place of a deputy AD. There was a couple of the circumstances were COVID hit in 2020.
Yeah.
I was a deputy AD. There was a lot going on politically and within the university about cutting sports. We didn't cut sports because we balanced it out as a top administrators. And when we didn't cut sports, the AD after COVID was let go. I was a senior administrator. So that means the new AD coming in would bring in their own senior administrator. So eventually I knew it was coming. I didn't want to just say, I'll take whatever's next. I'll just, Pastor Mike called and opportunity to come and be a co-pastor here at Hope-Elim. It wasn't just, I'll take something now that I know something is changing. I actually applied for a role on campus as an assistant vice chancellor, which I saw everything lining up. So now I had something to pray about.
Yeah.
This or that. To come here would mean that Natasha would probably stay there for almost 2 years because we have boys in school, and it made sense from a financial standpoint with the tuition assistance for her to stay. So it didn't line up that logically we would make the call, but in our spirit we knew that this is what God had for us. And the resolve was there. So to be able to say to Pastor Mike, yep, I'm coming, let's go, was the resolve. So sometimes it's not always clear. And when I got here, I thought, what have I done? And at the end of the day, it was the right decision. And I think that sometimes it doesn't always look right.
The decision. So you coming to Elim as the pastor was not really the first time you were a pastor. You, like you were saying, you've been a pastor for a very long time, not as your primary full-time job. So what's is there a difference between the calling to, okay, I'm going to minister in my current job and role and vocation, or I'm going to now do this full time as a career. What was that calling like? Was it any different? Because I think a lot of people, especially like new Christians, they feel like I've come to faith. That means I got to go work for the church. And so what did you experience, and how would you say to someone who's kind of trying to figure that out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to recognize right off the bat that my journey is not everybody's journey, but I will describe what gave me led to the resolve. The tutelage and the apprenticeship and the preparation and equipping that I got from not only Dr. Carlos Taylor, but Michael Hurst at Elim, and the relational equity of pastoring at Elim, even though I wasn't the pastor. I was still serving in built relationships, so I knew and cared. But there is a difference between being in the role of a pastor versus assisting. There's some similarities, but there's a difference. And so what helped me to step into that space was 2019, my mom passed. And after that, I was at Mizzou, and I had been there 3 years, and I knew there was a campus ministry that would benefit from me starting one. And so when my mom passed, I started that campus ministry in 2019, and it was started to thrive. And I was basically the pastor, and it was 60, 70 students that were coming. And then COVID hit in 2020. So then I got online, and I had maybe now 10 to 12 that stayed because things scattered. And so I was faithful for another 3 years of that refuge, is what I called it. God gave me Psalm 46:1. So the refuge, that I didn't even know was equipping me to come to Hope-Elim. To one, continue to pastor, two, preparation, provision. And so when I came for 2022, 2023 was their first anniversary as their speaker. I didn't even know it, but that was an opportunity for me to see it. God showing me this was going to be a place some months later that I'd be called back to become a co-pastor.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I thought the whole journey was part of the equipping for the season to say yes, as opposed to, now I'm called. Let me go now and take these steps so that I can take some of the control of what it looks like to become a pastor, as opposed to following the heart of God and saying, it's time.
This is very, very powerful. I want to amen this. Like, again, what I'm hearing is an awareness of the journey that often people don't have. The other is, there's a famous quote by Mother Teresa when someone asked, did she think she would be sainted once she passed away? And her response was, don't make me a saint. I don't want to be written off that way. Well, that would be the same as, don't tell me I need to be clergy. I don't want to be written off that way. Is often, I think, the response when someone really senses the call to follow Jesus is that sometimes the way that other people process it with is, they want to be clergy. Like, no, that's actually what it looks like when you follow Jesus. That's for everybody, not just for church staff. And I also think just the organic nature that I'm thinking Romans 8, 28 and 29, that God was using all circumstances, relationships, and events to shape you into the image of Christ, into your vocation. I'm thinking of experiencing God. I want to give a shout out for that. I mean, I've taught that. It is one of the best books on discernment, whether you're talking about an individual or a congregation on mission. I mean, just what those things. And
they stick. They're sticky.
Yeah, they
are.
Something
that can be used. And here's the thing. I know of young men who are in recovery who recently has gone through it. And we have this discussion because they're excited about it. I remember it, and I can see the impact on their lives. To be able to have a way of approaching, how am I hearing from God? How do I experience God? I'm not saying this is to make all of it, but it's along the way. It's a part of the equipping. Because for some different people, there'll be different things that become sticky that they'll use. They'll remember different teachings, different strategies. And that was one. God is always at work. And then there's always this opportunity to say, is that him? How is God speaking? Speaks through his word, through circumstances, through people, through a whisper. And in that way, just to be able to have a way to say how God worked with me, and when he works through you, regardless, that's my God. He's working through you. I see him in you, and I'm inspired by that. So I think in those ways, I actually thought, I never desired to be a preacher or a pastor. Until I knew that God was leading that way. I thought maybe a president of a university, an athletic director, and those are the ways that I was approaching my education and my athletic and then this piece made it known that this was it. And so it's not something that, Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. I wasn't necessarily desiring it, but I was delighting in him, and it made it plain that this was a pathway that he made clear. So it's not always clear, and it's not always something you pursue. It can be, but it's not always that way. And I just think that along the way, people, journeys intersect, and all of a sudden,
What I'm hearing is a lot of recognizing the way that God has worked in your life previously, and then it sort of helps know where he's leading you next. Like what's he already done? Because sometimes it's easier to see what he's done in hindsight. Right? And so I love how you're talking about, like, these are the things that God was doing in me, and then it became clear. It was never like, I'm going to force this direction on my life. But at the same time, when it became the right opportunity, you felt ready for it. You felt like that's where clearly God was leading you. And there was a desire for it. God gave you the desire for it, but not necessarily of like you taking the wheel and saying, we're going to go this way. You just joined him in that.
Yeah.
And that wasn't it was shocking. If your 18-year-old self
Yeah.
saw you now,
Never
you
saw it.
probably wouldn't even recognize it. But
No.
you're at the same time, from your perspective looking back, it probably seems so natural. So, like, of course, that's where God was leading me.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
for sure. There was this thing in Louisiana. It's called botillion. I don't know if you ever heard of what a botillion. It's
What
kind of
is
like
that?
what is it called for girls? It's
Occultillion?
a cotillion, maybe a cotillion for girls. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a botillion for guys. I don't know. But
Okay.
it was one of those things where you display some talents and you do these things. You kind of, and then you're coming out as a young man in the community. And so I made this botillion. I don't know why I did it, but my talent, literally, it wasn't even a talent because I really didn't have it, right? But I did a sermon. I actually, as a young guy, and my idea of doing a sermon in the Baptist, it was like, you know, how this hooping, like, you know, acting like, I was a preacher. And
Yeah.
I was like, and so I remember as a young guy just doing that on this stage and probably just being supportive of that community. Like, oh, yeah, this guy was like, oh, that was an interesting response.
Yeah.
But I'm reflective way as an adult looking back that I did that. So I don't know if it was just a part of what was in me at all,
Yeah.
why I would choose that. But that was just something that I remember that was just another little piece of the journey.
Yeah.
And I think the overall journey, it didn't necessarily was going to lead to a preacher, but in reflection, it was something that I think was just a part of, for me, the yes and the resolve of being at least a pastor,
Yeah.
an assistant pastor. So I think along the way, there's these little reflection points. And then I think we could lean on that to know that there's been an equipping along the way.
Yeah.
Again, I'm thinking of Psalm 139 where it says we are knitted together in our mother's womb. And the phrase that's coming to me is God hasn't finished knitting us. And so I see him weaving his way through your life. I mean, so at the Botillion, you know, you're preaching and you know, with all the fervor of a good Baptist preacher. And, you know, and you're thinking, well, that was fun, move on. But something, God was weaving something again and again and again. We do a thing here called the Life Map Timeline. And I remember the first time I was introduced to it, I was just thunderstruck because I didn't think there was much of a pattern to my life. And then again, looking back, I was just floored at how God kept showing up and with patterns and at crisis moments by bringing people into my life, by giving me opportunities, or I just thought that was a good thing to do. And God was actually saying, I'm going to put you there. You know, and then there's places where I made bad decisions and God says, that's not going to be the last word. I'm going to redeem that, you know. And so I think one of the things I keep hearing over and over again is noticing what God is up to, noticing what God has done, and then that helps you make sense of where you're going. And then the listening points are obviously prayer, scripture, but also wise people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also paying attention to circumstances, you know, and that's what helps us. But even still, it's going to be messy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, this has been a really great conversation. Normally we have these outline of notes, and the really great episodes are ones that we typically don't follow the outline very much because it just like naturally flows. So, what I'm hearing a lot to kind of like recap it is, you know, being aware of where God's been equipping you, and wherever it is that you find yourself, seeing that as an opportunity was a huge thing. It's a sacrifice, but where's the opportunity to meet people instead of the task, and being in constant prayer about where God's leading you next, and how He's guiding you, and not how we're trying to guide our own direction. But also, not being afraid of making the wrong decision, because if you do it faithfully, God's going to meet you in that place, in that, and guide you in the quote unquote wrong decision to the right decision, or to the right place.
Yes.
And so I just love your perspective on every season of life you've had, because I think there's a lot of people that can find themselves in each one of those, and the joyful, opportunistic, like, attitude you have towards whatever it is that wherever God's placed you. Is there anything else that you guys would add to?
You did
that?
great. I think
That was
you
all
hit
you.
it.
I was just recapping.
But I would say even now, like, we're not stuck. We're still journeying by faith with the Lord, in that whatever we're doing, whether we are so overjoyed of what it is we're doing, it's not ours. It's still having our hands open and extended to say, God, whatever you want to do. If you want me here, what I'm doing for the next whatever, let's go. And God, if it's yours, so if there's another season of somewhere else doing something else, then let's go, whatever that is, so that it's not becomes mine and I butt my elbows out. I love God has got me in a beautiful space at Hope-Elim, and I'm overjoyed, but it's not mine. And so if there is another season of life that God has in store that he desires, and he makes it plain with resolve, let's go. But if it's to be right here, just building, doing and going, and just continue to add to, let's go. So so whether the decision is not mine to be made, whether I'm here or not here, it's whether or not I'm just in alignment with what he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. Richard, you got anything to add?
I just get the privilege of working with this guy, and just following his lead and watching a congregation flourish. And I'm learning so much. I mean, it's so you were talking about the person who, that mentored you all the way through. I feel like I'm being mentored. And it just, again, it's just an honor and a privilege. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's a two-way street. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Brian, and thank you for joining us, everyone who's listening. If you have any questions on a previous topic or suggestions for a future one, we would love to hear from you. You can click the link in the description to submit those. That's linktree.com/wordwithweb. We'll talk to you next time.
You bet. Take care.